Jeremy, we've been here before with England groups. Let's not tempt fate, but it does look like quite an easy one this time, doesn't it?
It does, and I'm going to tempt fate and say I'm quite optimistic of a fairly straightforward progression. I think the gulf now with the Premier League clubs that we see and the rest of the world, especially some of the nations that we're up against, is so big, and it's a real opportunity to maybe gather some momentum and a bit of feel good and a few goals as well. I know everybody will just want to get the wins to start with, understandably, but I think there's an opportunity as well to get the momentum's critical in a competition like this.
Glad to hear you're optimistic. That is slightly in contrast with the mood of a lot of the football supporting nation. Is that pessimism about Gareth Southgate and this team justified?
Despite the disappointment of the last hour of the final of the Euros, Gareth Southgate's done an absolutely phenomenal job, and we've got a wonderful group of players, particularly attacking players. It's just to get that final click where you can find a formation where the Fodens, the Mounts, the Sakas, obviously Kane, Sterling, that you get. I'm much more optimistic and I don't worry too much about what's happened in the Nations League, to be honest.
Do you think the timing of this World Cup helps or hinders England?
Well, I always thought it was going to be a huge help. I really did. That was without quite computing at the time the extent to which this fixture schedule would be crammed up before the World Cup. So I've kind of flipped slightly on that, and I think it's like a tightrope situation. It could work to our advantage, but we could fall off the rope a bit because of those games immediately before the World Cup.
Let's get into England's opponents. Iran are the first up for them.
Carlos Queiroz has just come back, who obviously football fans, particularly in Manchester, will be familiar with. He was Iran manager for quite a number of years. Obviously got a real big job off the field, perhaps even more than on it, where lots of good reports from Iran as a very sort of good football team that have the potential to reach the knockout phase.
There are some calls for them to be kicked out of the tournament. What's the story there, Jeremy?
The Ukrainian FA, there's a sort of suspicion that they're supportive of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, and the backdrop really is a huge political backdrop in Iran at the moment over the death in custody of a woman who was deemed to have worn a hijab inappropriately. And the football's been drawn into that. Some players have appeared to give a kind of tacit support for the protesters, and obviously the government is under a lot of scrutiny for the way in which it's clamped down. So that backdrop is really live and current in Iran at the moment.
Very big winter indeed for Wales. What's the historical significance of their appearance at this World Cup?
Absolutely huge. Obviously they've never been in a World Cup since 1958 when they reached the quarter-finals. Be a good number of Welsh fans out there, which was a massive thing for them in France when they did so well in the Euros. I was lucky to cover Wales through that competition, and the sort of sense of history then, because that was the first tournament that they'd qualified for. You could really feel the difference that it made, and it really galvanised the squad, and you almost felt like they were playing for something bigger than sport. I know all the teams are playing for their country, but you felt it through everything they said, everything they did. So it's a massive moment for Welsh football.
Do you think they can harness that again and do similarly at this tournament to how they got on in 2016?
Gareth Bale and Aaron Ramsey were talismanic figures in France, so it just gave them, although as I say, the rest of the squad perhaps a bit weaker than the one we've got now, they had those two that were absolute superstars. And obviously we know that Gareth Bale's only played 5 minutes since September. Ramsey's been playing in France, but they're not at the level that they were at that time. So that's what makes me think that probably to get through the group will probably be the sort of ceiling of their ambitions.
I've got a few friends in America who are not feeling optimistic about their chances. What do you make of their team this time out?
Yeah, I mean, Pulisic is obviously the sort of outstanding player, scored a lot of goals in qualifying. But like you, when I had a bit of a closer look at the group beforehand, I think they're always it's a bit of a cliche, but quite a well-developed league, so they'll be well organised. They're not going to be a bad team, but they don't feel like a team that are going to really progress very far, and they seem like they lack quality to really trouble a team like England and perhaps even Wales.
Yeah, some concerns about the defence.
So I think England will qualify as group winners. I think you could make a case again for any of the other teams, but I'm going for Wales, despite thinking they're not quite at the level they were at the Euros in 2018. But I think Wales will get through second.